Some of you may remember on the last call, one of the things that we had discussed was power mapping, specifically in the realm of eco-socialism and what that might look like, the value of it, and who might be involved in the process. So since then, David, Mel, and I have had a couple of conversations about what it could look like. And so we're going to just kind of run through this real quickly. And hopefully we get through it fast enough that we have some time for Q&A and discussion. Mel, anything you want to add on the intro part?
Nope. I'm good. I did the slides. Okay.
Let's do it.
Oh, David.
Oh, that's right. I was going to, so look.
Slide. This is your slide, David.
Thank you. Oops. So by eco-socialism, we are talking about a new social, political, and economic system that involves social ownership, not state ownership of the instruments of production and exchange. That production is about use value and meeting human needs. The idea that production decisions should be made democratically by the workers and affected communities, that all major social decisions made democratically by society as a whole, an end to patriarchy, racism and white supremacism, imperialism, and all forms of oppression, and that decision-making is guided by the need to restore and maintain the health of our natural ecosystem. To be clear, we are not dogmatic, but we want to be explicit and transparent that this is how we see some of those contours. We recognize we got lots of comrades who believe in state ownership, and we want to engage and work with them. But for the Green Eco-Socialist Network, that's the space you're stepping into. Mel?
All right.
It's Shamako, actually. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So why is power mapping important? First, we continue to struggle with fascism, and we continue to move towards a new world. So I would say there was a time, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where folks might debate whether or not we see and are experiencing a rising tide of organized, well-funded, structured fascism. I think you pretty much have to have your head in the sand to make that argument today. If that is your argument, sure, let's engage it. But for the sake of this discussion, we're assuming we understand that fascism exists currently. We also understand that there are a variety of objective conditions, some of them environmental, some of them economic, that are creating certain social and cultural conditions, and that those conditions open up a wide space of opportunity. Fascism is one of the forces contending, but there are other forces as well, including eco-socialism. We're all familiar with the concept of power mapping. More often than not, this tool is utilized by those with vast resources and in politics, more often than not in the service of electoral politics and the two major parties. So some of our thinking on this was that, for any of us who have experience inside of the Democratic Party, working in elections and GOTV stuff, or with organizations that sort of run those kind of formal campaigns, power mapping is it's a pretty standard tool. One of the things that we think is important that we have an opportunity to do moving forward is to take advantage of that tool, specifically in the realm of eco-socialism, as defined sort of in the previous slide, outside of just the sort of standard GOTV, two-party model. In this presentation, we will present the argument that with the polarization and balkanization of the American political landscape, now is the time for us to engage the tool of power mapping for the purposes of identifying opportunities for a more radical political, social, and cultural agenda, which is basically what I was talking about. And we believe that at this time, growing our power requires, or at minimum benefits, from a larger visual view of what our real objective political conditions are at the current time. So, we have a lot of abstract conversations about sort of what our situation is and what challenges and difficulties we're facing. And so, one of the things that we want to do is we want to actually have a concrete picture of what these elements are. And Eleanor, I saw your question, what is power mapping? Which I think we're going to cover in the next slide. So
Okay, so power mapping your region. And so what we're going to do today is a method of power mapping. It's a little bit different from maybe if you've done some power mapping before, what it is. And it's specifically an eco-socialist type of power mapping. Why? Because, well, we acknowledge, right, that the environmental crisis is part of it. And so, the environmental crisis has to be integral to our understanding of how things might shake out. Let's also, acknowledge that Mother Nature herself is a political actor in this time period. So, so that's, being able to integrate the factors that are more than ourselves and the more than our class relations at this time is going to be real important. So number one, so, again, there's all kinds of complexities and stuff, but just kind of drilling it down into sort of 5 points or 5 steps, right? So number one, geographically grounding yourself is really, really important. Where are you? What is your region? Whatever that means. Is it's a political region? Is it a bioregion? Is it a city? Is it a city in hinterland, etc.? Whatever you feel like makes sense for the organizing you're doing. It's a manageable chunk, and B, you have to ground yourself in where you are, because where you are, there's going to be different conditions based on your literal geography, right? Number two, what we're going to do is an assessment of environmental and socioeconomic conditions together. So we're going to look at, what is the actual landscape going to look like? Like, what is our actual conditions in which we organize? If it's too hot to organize, that's a thing, right? If it's too cold to organize, that's a thing. If you're going to have disasters, all of these things affect how the political landscape is going to shift. It's socioeconomic conditions, being able to put that together is a huge thing. Where I am in unceded occupied Machuca territory, we have climate refugees already, right? We're in a disaster zone. We have these things. And so, being able to understand what the ecological realities are, and then how that's going to impact on communities in particular, is a really important thing to understand. Number three is identify relevant political formations. What are the balance of forces in this region that you're organizing in? And as we know, it's not just the left parties, but also all the different kinds of things that are being influential at your local, at your state level, however you define it. Number four is identify policy opportunities and imperatives, right? This is about kind of how do we shift, right? What the Overton window of what is thought possible based on the real needs of communities, of all communities in your region. And then how do we get it? How do we get, and not just like, how do we get it like in a real direct way, but how do we create enabling conditions to enable these grassroots and eco-socialist non-reformist reforms to emerge and disable the forces doing harm, right? And then finally, we support, how do we map to support and expand movement-based infrastructure? A lot of the eco-socialist organizations and groups in this country are going, are really moving into land-based projects, into community autonomy projects, into solidarity economies. How can we figure out where and how we can interface and uplift, ally, and grow these locally based coalitions so that we can build political power as well? So for our region, Shamako, you want to kick back to? Yeah.
I want you to continue real quick. David, what's our time check?
Literally typing it in. You're 10 minutes into your 30 minutes.
All right.
Okay. Mel, yeah. So you take this, and then we will Q&A.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. So for example, Northern California, we're going to walk through the process of power mapping in this particular part of California. It's that upper half, right, from the Bay Area up to the state line. And so there's different ways we can cut it. We can cut it through counties and economic regions, right? We can do it through geographic and topo and eco regions. So we have the Sierra Nevada and the Central Valley, and we have also tribal territories. Guess what? Tribal territories are often bioregional ones. And so, and also tribes are a political power and a force, and should be and needs to be uplifted as such. So we're going to walk through all of this just to look at, you know, what we're going to be facing, what our conditions are, and how we go forward. So I'm going to go real quick through the conditions part. Is that okay, Shamako, or do you want something else to say about this regional?
No, you're good. Go ahead.
All right, cool. All right, so the first thing we have to do is assess our environmental conditions. What are not just what we're experiencing now, but what we expect to experience in our region over the next, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? And there are websites and tools that can help you do this. So the Federal Climate Change Toolkit is a website where you can actually go and look up by county or by state and look up what the actual projected climate conditions are for your region. What are the hazards you need to look out for? If you're in hurricane country, you want to know how much more frequent and intense are these hurricanes are going to be. If we're here in Northern California, we want to know about fires and temperature and all of that stuff. Many states also have on the state level a climate assessment tool. For California, our climate assessment tool is called CalAdapt, and it's really easy to use. And you can just click on, you know, whatever like climate condition you're interested in. It'll give you graphs, time series, maps, videos, all kinds of good stuff. And then at the regional level, USGS actually hosts these regional climate adaptation science centers. These are university-based. It's kind of like the space where scientists, climate scientists, and other folks like kind of come together. And you know, these are resources you can tap. You can call them up. You can ask, you know, if you're looking for any kind of specific data. Okay, so looking at this Northern California region, so taking some of these tools, these are some of the conditions we're going to be looking at, right? Here in Chico, California, we had 60 days straight of over 100 degree temperatures this summer, right? And so, like, you know, take this data and kind of say, okay, whatever it is, whatever they say, it's going to be worse. Because that's kind of been our track record so far. Like, here's the projections. Oh shit, we like hit the 10-year mark next year, you know? So, you know, take this, you know, as you will, but it's never going to be better than this. It's going to be worse, actually, you know? So, you have average daily high temperatures. As you can see in that valley region, we're going to have 90 degrees average temperature for the whole year. Okay, so let's think about how impact that's going to have on communities, on elders, on energy needs, on, you know, all of these things, right? That's a huge thing. Coastal high tide flooding with sea level rise. David, you got to watch out. You know, Shamako, you got to watch out too. You're all in the coast and you got blue dots where you are. So, you know, let's think about their coastal communities. Let's think about how that's going to impact. 85% of people in the United States live in a coastal area that will be subject to flooding in climate change. So that's a big thing to consider. And of course, we've got our wildfire risk, right? And so the Sierra Nevadas, the Coast Range, the Klamath Mountains, all of these, you know, we already know, like we already know this part, you know, we get fires every year and we're going to get climate refugees every year, right? Towns are burning down all over the place in these areas. We also have, and this is less well known, right? We are going to, so there's a 200-year mega flood that comes through California every 200 years. The indigenous people know this, but California has only been a state for 180 years. So guess what? Most people in California don't even know this is going to happen, right? But it is going to happen. It is science. The climate scientists just came out with a report saying it's going to come in the next 7 to 10 years. I put 20 just to be generous, but really it's 7 to 10 years. FEMA and USGS call it the $1 trillion disaster. This flood is it's literally it's biblical, y'all. It's gonna take out agriculture. It's gonna take out the water infrastructure. You know, California has the 3rd largest agricultural economy in the world. So what happens here is going to affect the world. Okay, like forget your olives, man. You know, forget your almonds, right? Under climate change conditions, they're predicting that this frequency of this great flood is going to change to every 50 years instead of every 200, right? So that is absolutely something we have to know about. It's this, here's a scary, scary video for you all. All right. Okay, so Shamako, you want to talk a little bit about how socioeconomic conditions, why it's real important to map these as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to that extent, I want to talk about really like 2 primary things, just as examples of each. One of those, I think Mel's kind of outlined really well, and that is sort of the objective conditions of the environment and climate change, and what that will mean about not just how people have to organize for immediate response, but how people will have to organize down the road for survival. And then additionally, talking a little bit about economic conditions. One thing in particular that I want to bring up is automation, and the impact of automation on workers. And, you know, it's funny because I'm sure we're all familiar with Andrew Yang, who unfortunately is one of the people who is talking about automation the most in the public eye, but comes to the absolute worst possible conclusions. And so, you know, as we see workers being forced out of the market, people being forced into the gig economy without access to healthcare, you know, these things will also continue to produce objective conditions that are very ripe opportunities for us. And so with that said, I'm gonna pass it back to Mel to talk a little bit about these links.
Okay, so these are some really cool links that combines the economic and the environmental crisis into a map that's real, you know, convenient to understand. So the justice map is something, it doesn't have environmental data, but it's real important to be able to look up income and demographic data by census tract. They also have time series, so you can actually see, you know, like the displacements happening in real time. The climate impact map has a lot of the same data I just showed, but it has also the projected rates of excess mortality due to climate change and mapping that. And so you can overlay that map onto the, you know, the racial and income map, and you know, you will know what those results are, right? UC Berkeley also has an incredible project called the Urban Displacement Project. They started out with the Bay Area, but now they have 15 metropolitan centers worldwide where it's tracking the gentrification, is tracking, you know, the skyrocketing rents, and what is that doing to communities? How is it breaking up, you know, historic communities, you know, and also like the racial dynamics of displacement as well. And then finally, Mapping for Environmental Justice is another project out of UC Berkeley, which also looks at things like pollution, groundwater contamination, and other types of environmental problems affecting communities. All right, so Shamako, you want to talk about this, the racial income distribution in Northern California?
Yeah, but just to check in real quick, because I know we have, I think, 10 minutes left.
Okay, so we can just maybe speed through this. This is just, you know, kind of.
Yeah, because I want to make sure we get a chance for Q&A and discussion.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so justice map, go to it. This shows here, like, weirdly enough, the pinker it gets, the whiter it gets, which is kind of funny. But it's like, wait a minute, if only they were pink. If they're only they were pinkos, but they're not. So they're actually fascists. So, you know, but it shows, you know, again, this racial distribution and this income distribution, as you can see where the wealth is concentrated, right? And it's important also to, I just want to mention real quick that, you know, the upper part of the state, the square part of the state that nobody remembers exists until it's on fire, is actually I consider it an internal colony of the high income areas. Why? Because the water, the water from where I am goes to San Francisco, the Central Valley, and Los Angeles. Los Angeles literally owns water up here. The electricity that San Francisco uses comes from those high wildfire risk areas in the Sierra Nevada. They're talking about raising dams and putting all of these dams in to service the high income areas of California. So we need to remember that California has an internal colonization dynamic, that the urban areas take resources from the rural areas, and that's a big contributor to some of the problems that we have.
I do want to say one really quick thing. So one thing to note about the racial distribution, and specifically as it relates to some of the socioeconomic changes that are brought on by automation. For instance, the growth of technology, the expansion of Silicon Valley Bay as it moved out from San Jose and then into San Francisco and then into Oakland, and the fact that basically almost nobody can afford to purchase a new house anymore in the immediate region, and entire populations of people have been pushed inland, north, and have actually started, at least as far as like say Black people, migrating back to the South. So that was it. I just want to throw that in there. Pass.
Yeah, thank you. Here's urban displacement. So here are all the obviously a lot of the urban areas are the areas most at risk for displacement. But as Shamako said, like a lot of folks being displaced from those urban areas are going to the rural areas. They're going to, like Oroville, which is, like the literal leader of the neo-Nazis, like used to live there, but now it's getting blacker and browner because more people are going there. Sacramento, Stockton, these areas are, you're seeing this kind of urban and rural displacement, which is why rural policy and organizing in rural areas is really important, because like, where are these urban displaced people going to, right? We have to consider that as well. All right, Shamako, you're on for this one. Oops.
All right, great. So this is our last pre-question period, right?
This is the relevant political formations, and then we have movement infrastructure, but we can combine it actually into one if you want to do that.
Yeah. So let's do that. Okay. So this basically references two different we'll say types of institutions. One being sort of specific political formations that might include political parties, overtly political organizations, socialist, anarchist collectives, sort of things of that nature. Obviously, a lot of folks in here are Greens. So, this map would, in the ideal, sort of include, the Green parties by county. If there are local Green parties, also those. But we also, have the Peace and Freedom Party. We also have the outright Socialist Party. So, the degree to which those formations can actually work cooperatively on the ground, I think that's a case-by-case basis. But in addition to that, we also have, if you want to just hop to the next slide real quick, Mel. Try to speed through it. So we also have, in addition to that, community organizations or community-based organizations, and or sort of specific formations that may be emerging in response to things. So we have Little Hearts. I was going to point out that we work with several organizations here in Oakland. For instance, in my mind, I think of in San Jose Debug or Silicon Valley Debug. We don't really have time to go through the list the way I might have liked to right now, because I want to get to the Q&A, but combined between these two maps, what you get is sort of a picture of what you have in terms of resources organizationally, both with political parties as well as community organizations, which can then be wrapped around some of the social, economic, and environmental conditions. Again, objectively, we can see maybe what organizations have emerged in response to those conditions, and also what opportunities may be available for the creation of new organizations and or policy exploration. Pass.
All right. The last thing that I'm gonna just super talk about is just the oops. Oh yeah. And so once we've mapped all of that, we can also zoom out to the national level. This was a power map that was created at the Eco-Socialism from Below summit gathering this past summer. So now we can actually look to see, hey, look, all of this stuff is happening. We can look at who we can, if we have one region, we can see who's in the neighboring region and kind of grow our network from there. Okay. And so, oh yeah, the last thing would be that, again, when we're looking at, how we organize for political power, we've got to go from what we need, right? From the perspective of the objective conditions, what are the economic, environmental, and policy conditions that could be learned from, built on, and connected to. So we need to research, dialogue, and strategize with each other. Okay, I think we got that all done. Boop.
All right, so I know we don't have as much time as we would have liked, but questions, comments, concerns, feedback?
Yeah, Shamako, this is Rose. I have a quick question about the Peace and Freedom Party. Is it active? I can remember it from way back in the day. Could you say a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to get too bogged down, but the Peace and Freedom Party is, at least as I understand it, and feel free to correct me, is primarily an anti-war party. That was sort of its flagship issue. I don't think, I think it was a lot more active, for instance, during the early 2000s, during the Bush era, in response to some of the things that were happening in the Middle East. I know it's still around. I don't know if it's as prominent, but yeah, pass.
Thank you.
David and then Margaret.
Yes, thank you for a terrific presentation. I love the way you went from the abstract to the concrete. It's a challenge to all over the country to do that. You showed the high emission scenario, which is of course a terrible outcome. But I think, we all know as eco-socialists, we have to fight like hell to prevent that high emission scenario, and that should be, high on our agenda. I just want to comment on that. I'm looking forward to a map all over the country of what the other eco-socialist informed future could look like. So that's how we can building after your terrific presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Margaret?
Thank you both. That was great. I'm hoping you can put in the chat the link. There was a link specifically about climate risk, and anyway, so I was hoping to look it up because what I want to point out, people forget the climate risks of urban areas. I think people tend to ignore that. And it was about a little over a year ago here in New York, we had we caught the tail end of a hurricane and people died. To make a long story short, about 12 people died. Most of them lived in basement apartments. And the resolution has been to regulate basement apartments, which I suppose there's a need for, but it also talks about, it points to why we can't act like climate change impacts somebody else, and when it does impact us, that we are talking about some very serious class issues. So just wanted to point that out, and I look forward to being able to look up the risks for New York. Thank you both.
Absolutely. We can make this presentation available as a PDF, And absolutely, this is, part of these trying to be able to do these maps. You can get them and like overlay them, and you can definitely see where those things intersect. Shamako, any last thoughts before we go to the next presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess sort of the last thing I'd say is, we sort of did this coming off of the last conversation to build on that process. We would like to continue to expand this. So if folks like the idea, they want to support it. We can continue to expand this conversation. We might even want to have just, I don't know, like a workshop or something on it. But yeah, this is not the end. This is the beginning. That's what I'm basically saying. Pass.